Hi sharks, welcome back. Today is the episode you asked for it, where I answer your questions. I have questions from at least two people today. Two of them are from Corikay. Her name is Corey, but she goes by Corikay on the her username. Blah, I can't talk. Anyway, one of her questions here says, oh, she's paying me compliments. I'm not going to read all that because you might see my head start to get bigger, but I don't want it to pop. She says, I have absolutely no experience in markers. I don't have a whole heck of a lot of experience in markers either, so I've just been forcing myself to learn them, so I'll do my best to help here. I have absolutely no experience in markers, and I don't understand the difference between alcohol, ink, dye-based, blendable, etc. So I guess I'm asking for a tutorial on marker basics and how to use them. I have questions about the paper as well. One of the fashion artists on YouTube indicated that you must draw on the back side of the paper. Huh? Question mark. Once again, I'm in the weeds, probably just as well. I really don't need more stuff, but it would be fun to watch someone actually blend the colors, etc. Okay, well, I don't know much about markers either, but what I do know is that they're both blendable, but they blend in different ways. There are more options with blending water-based markers because you can use water to blend them, or you can use other markers to blend them together. And you have more working time with a water-based marker because they are water soluble. Therefore, every time you re-wet them, they're going to reactivate, kind of like watercolor does. In fact, some people will mistakenly call them watercolor markers. They're not watercolor. They're still a ink, but they're a water-soluble ink, just like the ink I use in my fountain pens. Some of it is permanent, and then I can put watercolor over it without moving it around, and others are water-based. So when I put watercolor over it, I end up with this muddy, sludgy-looking crap. And sometimes it's good-looking crap, and other times it's just ugly. So that's the difference, but as far as that goes. But then with alcohol-based markers, you don't have as much working time because they dry. They're going to dry, and once they're dry, they're permanently affixed to the paper. And another question you asked was, oh, I was talking about the blending. So with blending water-based markers, you can blend them with colors and keep reactivating them, and you can get some beautiful effects. With alcohol markers, and maybe it's just because I don't have much experience in alcohol markers except what I've learned on YouTube from other people, there is a guy that I love to watch. He has a lot of educational stuff, and he's just so fun. I think he's from New Zealand, and his accent is so cute too. But it's called Draw with Jazza, Jazza, and Draw with Jazza. And he has great marker tutorials on marker basics and all sorts of stuff. And then he's got all sorts of challenges that he does. Like one of his challenges was drawing an illustration with Crayola crayons, and that guy is freaking amazing, and he just does all sorts of wild stuff like that. So check him out, Draw with Jazza. There's a plug for him. Then with alcohol markers, what I was going to say is that the way you blend with an alcohol marker is not so much with the colorless blender. You can use that, but what that does is tends to pull color up and tends to bleach color. And I found that out the hard way by using it incorrectly, which is apparently what a lot of people do, and I didn't realize that. So I'm sorry, I'm watching the time because I have to get to church. But the way you blend is by having a lot of markers that are close in value, just, you know, a step up on the value scale or down on the value scale, and blending them one next to the other. But I will show you a trick that Draw with Jazza taught me, which was very, very cool. Okay, so I'm using my B Paper Company paper, and I've put a piece of paper behind it to protect, because this does tend to bleed through. So, and I grabbed 3 markers similar in color. These are Tombows, water soluble. I have 526, 528, and 515. So let me go ahead and lay one of them down. I'm going to try to blend these just by placing them side by side and then overlapping a little bit. And then I'm going to go back to this first marker and right at the overlapping point, try to blend them together a little. And then I'm going to go in with the 528, which is a little darker yet, and overlap a little bit. And then I'm going to go back with the second color, and at the overlap point only, just try to blend them together. Actually, that should probably be darker in the middle. And you can see that's one way to blend them together. But the easiest way to blend water-soluble markers is to keep them side by side on the scale, or side by side on the paper, like that. And then to just take a paintbrush with water on it and blend them together this kind of way. And you can blend them much easier than if you tried to do it with the marker all by itself. I can do this here. This paper is not the best for this, because water-soluble markers are actually better used on like watercolor paper, because now they're going to bleed through the back of this paper. See how they've bled through the back of the paper. So for me, the best way to blend a water-soluble marker would be to use a piece of watercolor paper and to take it, let's see, I'll just do a quick tree, for instance. This is just going to be a simple, very simple tree. To just go like this. Let's say I have the light source on this side of the tree. And then I have, oh, this one's drying up. Darn. I have to replace that. And then this will be my darker side of the tree. So I'm going to go back with the lighter one. And then I'm going to take my brush and blend them together. Whoops, I got too much water on that though. And then that's a good, easy way to show how to blend markers. And then if I wanted to do some leaves or something on the tree, or let's just, we'll say we have some foliage, I would just do something. I'm just doing this very quick, you guys. This is so sloppy, but this is just elementary, showing you how I can do this. Let's see, then maybe a medium color. Let's see, I want something a little bit greener though. Let's take something like this. There we go. That'll work better. And then I want a dark green to get the foliage underneath. I didn't even pick the correct greens, but you get the idea. So now I've got this all over, and I can take, just grab a bigger brush here, take this brush and I can actually blend it all out with the water. Now, doing this on marker paper is hard because it doesn't tolerate that much water or water-soluble ink. But anyway, you get an idea of how this can blend. And now I've got a tree. And it's got kind of a watercolor effect to it. So that's one way to use watercolor or water-soluble marker. But now, with the alcohol markers, obviously we can't use water to blend them together. So I'm going to show you how I learned to do this. 31, let me try that. We'll try this. Okay, I've got 4 markers here. 2 are the Copic Sketch, 2 are Copic Chow, and their Copic Chow numbers are on the side, not the end. But they're kind of 4 graduating colors. And now what I'm going to do is go ahead, actually that's got to go over here. I'm going to blend them together. And I told you about how Draw with Jazza does it. He does a system where if he has 4 markers, 1, 2, 3, and 4, he's going to go 1, 2, 1, 3, 2, 1, 2, 1, 3, 2, 4, 3, and then sometimes he goes back to 1 again. So now I'm going to show you the blending with the markers. Now he shows this because not everybody is going to have graduating numbers where you can go up 1 step and have them blending perfectly, right? So in order to do that, he would do number 1, then number 2, and then he's going to overlap number 2 over number 1 just a little bit, and then he's going to, at that overlap point, he's just going to add a little number 1 again. Except that's a little drier. There we go. And then he's going to go on to, so we got 1, 2, 1, and then he's going to go on to number 3, like this, overlap, and then go back to number 2, which was this color, and right at the overlap, just blend it like that, and then he's going to go to number 4, put that color up next to it, overlap, and then go back to number 3. And at the point of the overlap, blend them together. And he gets more of a graduated blending effect that way. So you can see how much better they blended. Actually, I think I did those colors in reverse. I should have actually done it like this. This would be number 1. Then I would have this one, I think is number 2, right? Nope, I did it right. Yeah, that pinker one. So anyway, you can see how they blend there. They blend a lot easier if you do that 1, 2, 1, 3, 2, 4. Right, 1, 2, 1, 3, 2, 4, 3, and then back to 1 again. And if you look at the back of these, both of these bled through on the paper because I added the water soluble really will come through, but this alcohol marker comes through as well. Now, if I take these alcohol markers on this paper, they start out like, let me show you this way by adding a line. See how they swell? You've got to watch while I'm doing it. See how it's growing behind the marker. and you can see it feathering. There's not a nice edge on that. They want to swell out and absorb, and I still get bleed through on the back of watercolor paper because they're just that juicy, I guess. But watercolor marker, even with the water added, did not bleed through on the back of watercolor paper. So that's another difference. So I hope that helped you a little bit. But I will do a video with a drawing that I'm doing with markers so that you can see some of the drawings, how I do them. But I'll do that in a separate video. Then I have another question from Corey. And I'm trying to find it here amongst all my photographs. I take screenshots of my questions. Here it is. Hi Sharon, thank you for another fact and fun-filled Q&A video. I have a question for your next Q&A. This is actually an older question. That's how long it's been since I put one of these up. Dr. P.H. Martin's Bombay ink versus the Radiant or Hydrus watercolor. What's the difference? They all seem to be staining, and while I know the Radiant isn't light fast and the Bombay inks are, when would you use one versus the other two? I'm totally confused about the ink category. Thank you, and I appreciate all your videos. Okay, you're welcome. And again, I'm not an expert on inks or watercolors for that matter, but I'll tell you what I know. First of all, Bombay ink is permanent. Once it hits the paper, it's going to remain permanent. Now, I find that the Hydrus watercolors, because they're staining, tend to be permanent too. I can lift a little bit of color, but very little. I've never used Radiant because, first of all, when I first found out about the watercolors, I got the Hydrus and didn't even know the Radiant existed. And that's probably a good thing because I would have wanted the light fast versus the non-light fast version. The difference, though, between the Bombay ink and the Hydrus, which are very staining, and the Bombay ink, which is staining, is that one is ink and one is actually watercolor. Hydrus watercolor is watercolor. But it is ground, the watercolor is ground into such a fine grain that it's able to seep through those layers in the paper fibers. And remember in the other video I was talking about staining watercolors and how they sink into the paper fibers and then you can run a brush over the top but you can't get out what's underneath. That's how it is for the Hydrus watercolors. They stain because they're seeping down into those paper fibers, and once they're down in there, there's no lifting them out unless you get a bottle of bleach and put it on there, but obviously you don't want to do that. So that is one of the major differences. The one is ink, and it's permanent ink, and India ink is a mineral-based or carbon-based ink, and those is very permanent. And I lost my train of thought. Oh, I hate when I do that. But anyway, it might come back to me. But anyway, that is the big difference. One is ink, one is watercolor. That's the biggest difference. Blend. You said something about both seem to be staining. Okay. When would you use one or versus the other two? I'm totally confused. Okay, well, I would never use Radiant. And because I have enough non-light fast watercolors, I don't think I would buy those. So that would be my first answer. And since I've never used Radiance, I really can't answer truthfully about one over the other as far as the way they feel or work on paper, or whether they stain on paper. I would assume they do because they're probably ground to a fine grain anyway, so that they stay water soluble and they don't separate out in their liquid. When would I use one over the other two? To be honest, I think I would always use watercolor over ink, but that's because I'm comfortable with it and I like the fact that I can move color around and blend color very well. I'm going to put some on paper though, and I'm going to try some tests out, and we'll see how one works over the other. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and use the same three, or as similar to the same colors as I can use for each of the ink and watercolors of Dr. P.H. Martin. This is the magenta color that I got with the Dr. P.H. Martin, and I'm using a damp brush, and now I'm going to add some water to it. As you can see, it's not as vibrant as the watercolors usually are. I can make it as vibrant as possible, but the second I try to dilute it, to add water, it really dilutes out because it's not really meant to be used with water. You can use it with water, but you can get the same watercolorish effects though by adding water and getting it to swirl around and that kind of thing. It's a little more difficult, but not too bad. Now I'm going to take the yellow. The yellow is much lighter. I can mix them together and blend to get colors, just like you can with watercolor. But the only thing is they're just not as vibrant and lively. Now I'm going to take them, let me wipe this out before it adheres totally to my palette. And I have to scrub it out with a scrubber. Using a porcelain palette is better with the inks because it's non-porous, but they're still hard to get out. Okay, now with the Dr. P.H. Martin Hydrus watercolors, I'm going to take the same yellow, orange, and red. Actually, I'm using a little warmer yellow, but that's okay. And this red. Okay, now when I look at these three, getting them all over myself, let's see here. I'll start with the yellow. Look at the difference in how vibrant it is just going on. To me, it flows much better on the paper. I hope these were both in frame. It flows better on the paper. That's the first thing I notice. Now when I add water to it, as long as it's still wet, it's going to move around. Now I know some of you have found that with the Dr. P.H. Martins, they're not real good at reconstituting. Once they're dry, they're set on your paper. They're very staining, and that's because the watercolor pigments are finely ground, and it makes it harder for them to reconstitute because they're getting deep down into those fibers of the paper, like I had said before. But you can get the watercolor effects where things swirl together and all of that kind of thing. Now, if I add water to it, I can thin it down. And then if I want to add some red into that, it should swirl all over. Some of them work better with that than others. But you can see already the difference in the vibrancy of the two colors. Whether they're dry or wet, they're still, this is damp. Oops. I'm going to dry them both, and then I will show you the difference. Okay. Now they're both dry, and you can see how much more vibrant the watercolor still has remained even after drying than the Bombay India ink has done. This has stayed very, very pale on the paper. Part of that is because I've used a damp brush to apply it with. Now, if I use a dip pen and let me grab the, I'll start with the orange. We have the orange in the center there. This is the Bombay, right? Yep. So if I grab the dip pen and get some ink on there, you can see it's much more vibrant using it dry. It's just as an ink should be. It contains the same vibrancy probably as the watercolor does, very close to it. Now, I don't know how close these colors are, but if I put that over the orange, they're almost the same. maybe a little bit difference in value. So you can see that, no, they're pretty much the same value. But when you use water with them, these kind of die out, where the watercolors remain watercolor, and they're so concentrated that even when you add water to them, they're still very concentrated. So that's the biggest difference that I can see. Now, they will tell you that these watercolors reconstitute. I'm telling you that they do not. Very, very little. So I'm going to start with the yellow here. Let me make sure there's nothing on my brush, and you can see there's no color on my brush at all. If I go to try to reconstitute the ink, there's nothing. Absolutely nothing coming off. I don't want to hit that wet ink, but you can see there's nothing coming off of there. It's permanent, as India ink should be. Now, this will show a little bit of reconstitution, but very little. I mean, that is, you can't get rid of your edges, no matter how hard I scrub. You get a little bit of color that comes up, but not enough to even say that that's really reconstituting. We'll try the pink or the red, and the same holds true for the red. You get a little bit of color lift, but you can't do anything with the edges. It's totally stained. And with the orange, I got to be careful not to pick up that India ink. The same thing. I can lift a little color off, but for the most part, my edges are exactly the way they were left. So that is one thing that I do not like about the Hydrus watercolors. They're not going to reconstitute. And I don't care who tells you differently. Here's your proof right there. They're not going to reconstitute. They're very staining. And it's only the nature of the beast. It's because they use such finely ground pigments that it allows it to go down into the paper fibers. So these are your differences between the inks and the Hydrus watercolors. I hope this helped you, Corey. These are the Bombay India inks, and these are the Hydrus. Hope this helps you. I had one more question that was from Gilberto that I am going to address in another You Asked For It video because this one is getting longer. So Gilberto, I have not forgotten about your question about seeing colors reflecting on leaves or on walls and all of that. I'm going to address that in my next You Asked For It video. I'll try to get that one up very soon so that you get your answer to that question. But in the meantime, I hope that these two questions were answered to your satisfaction, Corey. Like I said, I'm not a marker expert, so I can't really give you an expert answer. But I will put Draw Like Jazza's channel in the video description box below so that you guys can go check him out and his videos. In the meantime, be courageous, paint or draw with wild abandon, and most of all, be kind to each other. Have a great day, everyone. God bless.